let's work on some color pencil value scales. So we're going to be starting with our blue. So on your sheet, underneath in the boxes are some suggested colors for making the value scale. You don't necessarily need to use all of them, but each box should have 2 or 3 colors, minimum. So for our hue, I'm going to mix cerulean blue and true blue together. Notice I'm shading with the side of my pencil, and I am just building up a light layer of color. Because remember, I'm going to be doing multiple layers. I would say minimum 3, like bare minimum 3 layers. And these are on regular drawing paper, so the tooth is going to show up. But I want you to try to make it as smooth as you can. So as you build up those layers, so there's my 3rd layer. I'll move to the tint. And again, you're going to want to do a really light layer. And for this one, I only chose the lighter blue and the white. So with the white, I'm going to go over it. And you can kind of see it kind of makes it kind of dull, kind of waxy. So using white as your only highlight usually isn't the greatest. You can pull some interesting colors if you like. But for this, we're just going to practice using the white. So I'm going over it both directions. And then you can go back over it with the pencil if you want. It'll give a little bit of a different look to it. It kind of scratches into the white. For your tones, you want to layer the dark values first. So indigo blue is the most important color in the box of Prismacolors. So I'm going to layer that indigo blue. And then I will layer some of the other colors. So I'm doing a light layer. So I'm allowing myself to be able to do multiple layers. And you don't necessarily have to use all those colors I have listed. Those are just the ones that I would choose from. So then I'm going to go over it with the true blue. And then I'll look at it. And then I'll think about what else I need to add. So as you're doing these, I want you to think about this in your next assignment, which is to make spheres. So how did you make those dark values, and what colors worked versus which ones did you not really care for? So I'm adding that dark green in there, and it's making it a little bit too green, so I'm going back over it with the blue to bring it back to more of a blue tone. So I'm just trying to make a darker blue here. So it's just lots and lots of layering until you're happy with it. And then for your last layer, you want to add more pressure than your prior layers. Let's do some red. So I'm using poppy red and crimson red. So I'm again just starting with a light layer. I usually start with the dark one first. I don't think there's any rules to that. So I'm just doing a light layer. Then I'm going to go over a light layer with the poppy red. Poppy red is kind of an orangey type of red. And then for my tint, my lighter value, I'm going to use both of those colors and white. So another option would be if you are actually coloring like an apple or something, instead of just using white, you could find a pink or a peach in the highlight, and it might make it a little more interesting than just adding white, because again, white's going to make it kind of dull. I'm not a big fan of using white for everything, but we're practicing right now. So I'm going over it in small circular strokes and then building up pressure as I go. So So remember, you want at least 3 layers. And then for my tones, for red, I'm putting a little bit of violet down. But for red, I really love to use the dark green, because green is the complement of red and it will naturally darken it. So I have a little bit of violet, and then I'm using the dark green. And that will really make it look like a nice rich shadow color. And it will almost be black. So I could kind of leave it there if I wanted to, but I went back and started adding a little bit more richness to it, adding in the poppy red. But there you go. So let's do our yellow. Now the yellow is probably one of the trickier colors. So I'm going to be using this Spanish orange, which is kind of just yellow, so I don't know why it's Spanish orange. It's a yellow orange. And then mixing it with the bright canary yellow. Again, just make sure I'm using the side of my pencil to make light layers. If I used the tip, it would do a little more pressure than I wanted. So I'm going to do the same thing with the white, do a few layers, then do the white over the top. So later on you could also go in the cubbies and see if you can find a even paler yellow to use instead of white. Make it a little more interesting than just white. So the tone is going to be the trickiest one. So I'm going back in and darkening that a bit with the Spanish orange. So the complement of yellow is violet. So I like to use that Parma violet for my yellow tone. So I'm using a little bit, very, very light with the regular violet, but then I'm going to use Parma violet. So a tone of yellow is going to be kind of a brownish kind of color. So don't get weirded out if it starts to turn brown. That's what it's supposed to look like. So I'm using that goldenrod, which is kind of a dark yellow, over it. And it's looking kind of muddy, kind of brown, but that is what dark yellow is. So think of like sunflowers. And then I'm going to go over it with the Spanish orange, and then I'm going to finish it off with the canary yellow. So in that little space, I'll have all these different colors shining through. So it'll be really dimensional. Let's move on to our secondary colors with green. So for my hue, I'm going to use apple green and true green. So again, side of my pencil, light pencil strokes, light pressure, and circular motion. And I'm going to do 3 layers of those. So I kind of do one, do the other, and then go back over the top on the other. And then for the white, or for the tint, I'm going to do the same thing with the white. So lightly layer those 2 greens, and then a lot of pressure with the white. Once I get to the tone, remember the complement of green is red. So you'll see once I get to the tone that I'm actually going to use some red in there. So Tuscan Red is my favorite for darkening up the green. So it's not a cool color, a traditional cool color, but since it's a complement, it will automatically darken the green. Then going over it with a little bit of the indigo, I think, is the magic color. Or dark green. Excuse me, dark green. Then you can see it almost looks black because I added those complements together. And then finishing up with the local color, which is the true green and the apple green. Alright, violet. So violet is going to be a mix of Parma violet and violet. So light layers, side of the pencil, circular motion, building up layers, making dimensional color. Then like for the other colors, for the white, since this is a darker value just naturally, I'm going to try to do as least amount of pressure as I can. And then a lot of pressure with the white. Then for our tone, I'm going to really lean heavy on the indigo blue, the blue violet, and the violet. But again, light layers. So when you step back, you'll see all these little flecks of all these different colors that we have layered, and that's what gives it dimension and interest, instead of just doing a flat color. Alright, last but not least is our orange. So to create our orange, I'm using a layer of orange, canary yellow, and goldenrod. You could just pick orange and one of those colors, but again, to create a little more dimension in there, I'm just going to use all three. So same process, and then I go back over it a little bit heavier with the orange, just so it looks more like a true orange than a yellow orange. So I'm creating my tint, light layers. I believe that's my Spanish orange. I took out the yellow. I'm going to do a nice layer of white. So to do the tone of orange is kind of tricky, because then a lot of times it turns green, which also happens when we mix acrylic paints. So you just need to do light layers and then move back and forth with your colors to kind of bring it back into orange. So dark orange is going to be a brown. So if it starts looking brown, you're not wrong. I could also add, that's my goldenrod, I could also add a Tuscan red in there if I wanted to warm it up a bit if I needed to. But you can see doing the indigo and the goldenrod kind of makes it green. So I'm putting a little bit of violet in there. And then once I get to the orange, I'm going to do pretty heavier layer of the orange just so that orange shows through so it doesn't look too violet or anything. But there we go. So that would be a nice shadow of an orange color.